Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athletic trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase it all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. We are very excited for this interview episode.
Especially because it's first of the year.
It is the first of the year, and I think we picked the perfect person to kick off 2022.
Yeah, if you need some motivation, keep listening to this. We have Mike Stella on today.
Yes, that's right. We said Mike Stella. So he probably doesn't need as much of an introduction, but we're going to give it our best shot. So Mike Stella is a certified athletic trainer, corrective exercise specialist, and a performance enhancement specialist as well. He's the founder of the Movement Underground, where not only does he provide AT services, but he is also an educator, rock tape instructor, and provides mentorship for other athletic trainers. Before the Movement Underground, he previously has worked at the Division I level. He has provided care for many high-level athletes from the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, UFC, bodybuilding, and the United States Olympic team. Like I said, I don't think he needs much of an introduction, but there you go.
Let's hear from Mike.
As with any interaction, you got to start with some cryo breakers. So our first one is, what made you become an athletic trainer?
Oh, it's pretty easy. It's kind of the classic athletic trainer story, which was I was an injured athlete, and that's how it started. So in high school, I was a 3-sport athlete. So football, track and field, and lacrosse. Lacrosse was kind of, I guess, my calling in a way that I was going to play that at the next level. And I was a pretty highly recruited lacrosse player. And then I was unsure of where I wanted to go or where I was going to commit to. So I figured I would just play my senior year, and I would make that decision after and figure it out. And then unfortunately for me, I ended up having a catastrophic knee blowout. So I tore my ACL, PCL, MCL, meniscus, tibial plateau fracture, basically the whole shebang. Marist College, which is in Poughkeepsie, New York, was the last Division I school to offer me any money to play. And they happen to have an athletic training program, a KD accredited program. So nice. It kind of just worked out in that way. I was kind of unsure at that point what I wanted to do. But once I started going, my athletic trainer in high school, she was extremely influential on me during that recovery time. She really went out of her way to make sure that I was taken care of. And, that really rubbed off on me a lot. And so it was just like, wow, I could really see myself doing something like this. And I kind of jumped into it and never looked back.
Nice. That's awesome. I think people forget how influential the secondary school athletic trainers can be. Like they have absolutely. Such a huge impact.
I mean, it's like I grew up in a single parent household, and, my mom had 2 boys we were the same age basically and played sports. And, when I heard, that was the first serious injury that I had ever had. And so like, she didn't know what to do. She was lost. And Erin, she was there every step of the way, like setting up the doctors, explaining to us what the process was. We didn't even have insurance at that time. So dealing with the school's insurance and the doctors and physical therapy and all of it, she was just so helpful. And, for my mom, it was just a huge help because she just didn't know what to do. She didn't have the mental resources to, and again, this was in the early 2000s. So it wasn't like you could just YouTube it or, Google it really. Like, there was online resources, but it was limited. So, we really relied on her heavily to figure out that early part of the process. And so yeah, here I am now. Like that was in 2003. So it's a long time ago.
That's actually really fascinating that you touched on the point that athletic trainers have more impact on not just the athlete, like you, obviously that made you an athletic trainer or helped you on that pathway, but also the family aspect. Like, I don't think we've even talked about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think it was a huge relief for my mom to just know that there was somebody who knew what the hell was going on. And and she had like a cell phone that she could call and say, I got this in the mail. What should I do? And Erin really took care of all of it. We literally sent all the bills to her and she took care of everything. And so, it was just, again, for me, in a very, intense developmental period in my own life of trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I had done some BOCES programs and internships in like architecture and engineering. And I was thinking about going in that route, but I am not the kind of guy that can sit at a desk all day. Like, it's just not who I am. And so those experiences early on were like, no, I can't. And then when I started getting into the sports medicine stuff, cause like basically I always joke is like when you have like that kind of injury, it's like you went to knee school, right? It's like as a kid, I went to knee school because you're learning all these things about it. And it just really that kind of, and then the second part of that was I never really was ever able to achieve my prior level of performance. And that was a big influence on how I operate my business now and how I treat my athletes and kind of like my journey in continuing education and how I became obsessed like with this movement piece and the performance side of things, because I just was a guy that was naturally gifted in high school. I could run a 4.640 and I just never could be that guy again. And the injuries piled up in college. Like I just was always that guy that was hurt. Doesn't matter what I did. It felt like I just always ended up with a different injury. So like I tore up the labrum in my hip. I had disc issues in my lower back, and then I had ankle problems, and just like the knee was like the catalyst that kind of rolled downhill. And like in my years after post grad, I just became like obsessed with really figuring out my own issues. And it was selfishly motivated, if I'm being honest. And it came from like that deep insecurity of like kind of like an identity crisis as a human, because I just, you grow up like, oh man, you're so good at lacrosse and you're going to get a full ride and you're going to get a scholarship and you're going to play at a big time D1. And, and when you're 17, you start to believe your own hype, and so, which is a dangerous path to go down. And then when I just couldn't perform at the collegiate level, it really weighed on me. And I started having a lot of other issues like anxiety and depression and just not feeling like myself. And so it really was driven out of that, which is where a lot of my continuing education came in. And kind of it really was the foundation for, how I work with my athletes today.
Absolutely. And I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that gets forgotten, that that's the identity of a lot of these kids. Oh, I'm a football player. I'm a basketball player. And like when you have a significant injury that's keeping you out, for a long time, multiple months, a year, you really get lost on who you are because you're not doing that sport anymore.
Yeah, I think, and unfortunately, I think it's even worse now than it was 20 years ago when I was going through it, because, like we have these parents that just, they don't know how to disassociate the role of being a parent and the role of like a coach or an athletic trainer or a college recruiter. And they try to be everything for these kids, and the whole identity and even their identities become wrapped up in the kids' sports. When they're 12 and 13, they're taking them all over the country to play in these tournaments, and, oh, we got to play in this showcase. And it's like, well, no, you don't. And, it's important that a kid is a kid on some level and learns to socialize and have things that they're passionate about outside of the sport, because it doesn't matter who you are. We all have to face that day where you have to hang it up. And I work with professional athletes and even athletes that are long since retired from a career in professional sports. And that problem is a problem no matter what age you are. And honestly, I think it compounds itself as you get older. It becomes more and more difficult to cope with it. And so I really try to instill that in our younger athletes now, like instill the idea of like a work ethic and, keeping things in perspective. And yes, sports is important, and I know it's important to you, but think about the big picture. Take the 30,000 foot view, because you never know when that day comes that it's not, the juice ain't worth the squeeze anymore, and it's just like, and that for me was after my sophomore year of college. Injuries were just piling up. I had multiple concussion issues because I just wasn't the same guy. I wasn't the athlete I was, and I changed the way I played. And then I had to have that conversation with my coach and my head athletic trainer, and they were just, Mike, we just don't think this is for you anymore. Like, what's it worth? You're going to go play pro lacrosse, which again, at the time wasn't really a thing. It was a thing, but not in the sense that could be your job. And so, and I had to make that decision. Like, do I take this step back and focus on my career, which was the obvious choice, and what I did, because, at that point it wasn't worth the damage to my body with the multiple concussions. I was worried about long-term injuries, brain injuries, cognitive decline, all these other things that, again, 20 years ago, this was pre-impact testing, pre-baseline testing, all of that. Really, your screening to return an athlete to play was, are you asymptomatic or not? And, I was an athletic training student, so I knew exactly what they were going to ask. And I was able to manipulate that in my favor. But in my favor to get on the field, not to be healthy. And so,
Yeah.
Another question to get to know you. What is your athletic training spirit animal? And this is a modality, rehab tool, tape, brace, etc. Any tool of the trade, nothing's off limits, that represents you as a clinician.
my hands.
I like it.
I have a thing on my website
Mm-hmm.
that I wrote. It's kind of like the About Mike section, and I've always I think I've always been a decent writer. And it just kind of came out of me, and then when I read it back, it like actually made me emotional. But it's what the line is, I'm on a, like, it's kind of about like my journey as an athlete and how I had to change paths, and the path was to become the best sports medicine practitioner that I could be, and to heal as many people as I can with my head, my hands, and my heart. And so that to me is kind of like the mantra of the Movement Underground. It's like, it even gets me like choked up now to think about that, but it's, touch is such an impactful and powerful sense, as far as like human perspective and perception goes, sensory perception. And I really don't think outside of touch and movement, there are any other better modalities than those two. I think you can solve most people's issues with those two things only. And again, I'm a techie guy. When I first got into athletic training, I was all about like, frequency specific microcurrent and this and that, and like all these different cool modalities. And again, my first job out of college was at the University of Florida. And so we really had basically unlimited resources, so any newfangled tool, even if it had no evidence to support it, like we had it. And so it was really allowed me to explore a lot of different things. But the manual therapy stuff, I always saw, like my supervisor at that time, he was really into manual therapy. And when I would watch him instantly change an athlete on the table, I was like, man, that's where it's at. So that, yeah, my spirit animal, I would say, or like my thing, has definitely always been my hands, or just getting, hands on doing the work. I think it checks off all the three boxes as far as biopsychosocial, right? So we talk about a biopsychosocial approach to medicine, or treatment or rehabilitation. It's the biological part. There's a sensory interchange that's happening, right? So you're feeding the nervous system information via that mechanoreception, or via that touch modality. You're able to connect with somebody or really learn about them or exchange as far as psychological, right? So sometimes it's just about listening to the athlete and hearing them out. You might be the first person to actually listen to what they had to say and what they think. Well, it's true. And how many times we go to a doctor and they're looking at you through a clipboard, or, what I mean? Or
Mhm.
you're in with the doc for 2 seconds, and we put the MD on the pedestal. But like when you guys said before, we really, as athletic trainers, we make an impact because of the time that we spend in the trenches with people. Right. And then there's that social part, which is, I think, maybe even the most important part is, like Randy and I could do exactly the same treatment on an athlete, but if he has that trust, if he has that relationship, this is not my opinion. This is like the data, like it's science. We measured it. There's evidence to support this idea that because of that strong relationship, he's going to get a better outcome. Right. And again, maybe it's not an objective measure like, oh, he touched somebody and their strength improved, but
Yeah.
the outcome that they get out of that experience is going to be greater. And that is evidence-based, and that's part of what we do. So as far as the utility of manual therapy, it's like, obviously the theories have changed over the years, and some things have been debunked and other things haven't. And the reality is human beings were highly, highly social animals. This is driven through millions of years of evolution. And when you touch somebody, that changes both people.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the part that I've always put a heavy emphasis on as far as how I approached taking care of my teams and my athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, athletes like that connection. They want to feel connected to another person, and that's saying something important about if you can get someone to just feel good. Like a lot of people knock that, like, oh, they feel good, like, but did it really help? Well, clearly it did, because they feel
Right.
better. Like that.
Right.
That's the whole goal.
That's an outcome.
Yeah.
They feel better. So I think sometimes manual therapy gets that knock that, like, oh, well, did it really do this or this? Like, yeah, but they feel better. So I think
Right.
that's a worthwhile goal.
Yeah, I think people just get so tunnel visioned on the affective manual therapy. It's like if we're not making tissue level changes, then it's not working. It's like, what's your
Yeah.
definition of work then?
Yeah.
You know, like, are you, like using the force and like completely like, you know what I mean? Like fixing somebody in one session, like
Yeah.
that's ridiculous. And the crazy part about that is like, who the hell's claiming that to begin with? Like if somebody's making that claim, like I could fix somebody in one session, then they're a quack. And it's like, you're out of the conversation. We're not like, you're clearly on the marketing side of stuff and not the reality of what's expected or reasonable in clinical care. But, the real conversation is, how do you help people feel better? How do you help them move better and ultimately get them to move more, or move at a higher level to take them to that next step in their game or their performance or injury prevention or whatever, whatever other objective measure you want to use to look at success.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, getting into our main entrepreneurship topic, we like here on AT Corner to pair evidence and experience. So, Mike, if you could kick us off with a story or experience, a case study, something about owning your own business.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because you got to really be willing to take that leap. And for me, I've always loved athletic training. I've always loved working with athletes specifically because I was that guy. Like I was the guy that, like, I am now who I wish I had in my corner 25 years ago, and that version of me has manifested over time into what I'm doing now. And the entrepreneurship part of it kind of came in when I hit rock bottom as an athletic trainer, when I was ready to leave the profession. I was overworked, underpaid, underappreciated. Especially at that time, I had left the collegiate setting and went to the private PT setting. And, here I am, a guy that's, I wasn't like the most experienced athletic trainer ever, but I'm 5 years out of school. I'd already worked at major Division I institutions, where I was in charge of the care of multi-million-dollar athletes every single day. I was rehabbing and training athletes that were on Olympic teams from 9 different countries. And I went from that to folding towels and stretching people like off of a protocol. And it just was like the absolute most soul crushing thing, for me as a professional, I left the traditional setting because I just was burnt out. I just was, because I believed in this model of using my hands and doing the work for preventing. I definitely would go way above the call. It's easy for us to say, this is what I get paid, so I'm going to do the bare minimum. I'm going to do my job, but I'm not going to go the extra mile because it's just not worth it. And to be fair, I don't blame anybody for feeling that way, but I just couldn't do that. It just wasn't in my DNA. And so for me, I just burnt the candle at both ends to the point where there was just nothing left to give, honestly. I was just so worn thin that I just had nothing left. And so I took a PT job because I just wanted a regular, consistent schedule so that I could kind of repiece my life together, and have a salary that was at least livable. And again, this is, 40 something grand in New York City is not really livable, but
tough.
It was certainly a far cry better than 30. Working 80 hours a week for 30 grand a year. And then I'm at least working a normal 40 hours a week. And I was, here's a fun evidence story. I was bartending on the weekends to fund my athletic training career. As a person with a master's degree, right? That I would make more money bartending 4 nights a month than I would as a full-time certified athletic trainer working at a Division I school. And so it just destroyed me, man. It destroyed my soul. And I was like, you know what? Like at that point I was ready to leave athletic training, get a real job. I did my master's in sports management. So I had the foresight in my GA or my grad assistantship years to diversify my education just in case this, because listen, nobody gets into this to make $1 million a year. Like, let's be real. We do it because we love it. We do it because of the job that we get to do and the people that we get to work with. And it's a cool job. And I don't come from means, my family didn't come from money. And so like, I was really on my own. I had a lot of student debt. Like there's just so many factors that kind of like led to that decision. And so basically, long story short, even though that was a long story, was I figured I would roll the dice, and I felt like I had the knowledge and I had the skills and I had the experience and the chops to do it better than I saw it being done in the private sector. At that time, there was no precedent for athletic training in private practice. I called the New York State licensing board. I spoke to 3 different people. I got 3 different answers. I reached out to the NATA. I reached out to anybody that I could find that wasn't in a traditional setting and spoke to whoever would call me back. And I still couldn't I read the practice act from cover to cover and I couldn't find a real answer. And so I just decided I'd roll the dice. And if I failed, I was in exactly the same spot that I was in at that time. But if I didn't fail, or at least I was willing to double down on me in order to kind of stay in the profession, at least on some level. And so that was 7 years ago,
Nice. That's
and
so awesome.
I'm still doing it. And, it's really cool, man. It's really cool to see. And the crazy part about it all was in the time since I opened my business and started producing content, only a handful of times has anybody even asked me. And not to say that I don't think it matters, but what my background is, like what my licensure is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people don't realize is people will just want to pay for a result. And yes, you should be licensed and credentialed and have all that stuff in place. But I think a lot of athletic trainers are afraid to because they're not physical therapists or they're not massage therapists or they're not chiros. And a lot of athletic trainers jump into other programs and get more education to do the same thing that they're currently doing. And I think there's a lot of people we can help within our lane and within the scope of practice as an athletic trainer. And people will pay for it. People will pay for results and for somebody to be in their corner and have the relationship with the clinician that our athletes have every single day. And I'm living proof that that's the case.
Yeah, that's awesome. So speaking of taking that leap, what steps did you take to start your practice?
So, obviously outside of like what I just said about like calling and doing my due diligence to see what like kind of the legal status of it was. What I was able to do at that time was secure standing orders from a physician that I had developed a close relationship with through my traditional experience at working at one of the schools. He was going through the phase of entering retirement, but he loved the idea and he was a fan of mine and we worked really well together. And so he was willing to back me on that because I wasn't sure. So I got my standing orders. I formed my LLC. Got the insurances in place, to cover the liability of my business, personal liability insurance, all those things. And that was it, and then I was treating and training athletes just like I'd always been doing. And, obviously the marketing side of stuff took some time and that's where like social media kind of started to come in. I wasn't a big social media fan at that time. Like I had a Facebook, I had an Instagram. I was the guy that kind of scrolled through and saw what other people were doing, but I never would post much. And then, I started following like Gary Vaynerchuk, and I'm like, man, like if I really want to get my message out there, I have to start producing content. And so at the time I had just done it purely from a needs perspective of marketing to bring new clients to the door. And what actually happened completely changed my life. Like in so many ways, it changed my life. Like the people I've met, the relationships I've made and created, teaching for Rock Tape, being considered an expert in my field, regardless of the educational background, again, which I do think is still very, very strong on the athletic training side of the fence. But I think when it comes to public perception, we think as athletic trainers that people don't value us because we don't have a DPT or you know what I mean? And that's not true at all. Like, I do multiple six figures a year in revenue, and you can ask all those customers, they don't care. They care about the result and the experience and what you're able to do with them and for them. And that's ultimately what will pay the bills.
I love that you're giving that perspective because I feel like, especially young professionals, they just see a glass ceiling or a limit of what athletic trainers can do and what other professionals who have their own businesses and have their own practices are doing that a lot of us are not doing.
I mean, let's just do this right now. It's like for everybody, if you're a young athletic trainer and thinking about maybe one day that a business might be, or entrepreneurship. And first of all, like, entrepreneurship isn't the easy way. Like, this isn't for everybody. It's just
Yeah.
not. I mean, but you're looking at a field of people who work a ton of hours, who are absolutely dedicated to what they do, who have a skill set to help people. It's like, you're already doing everything that you'd have to do to be an entrepreneur. You're already putting in the hours. I got to work 80 hours a week. I still do, but I'd rather work 80 hours a week for myself than 40 hours a week for somebody else.
Absolutely.
At this point in my life. Like, I'll never go back to working for somebody else. And even like I work with multiple athletes from professional organizations, and I have, in the winter, we get a lot of our pro baseball guys back, like, hey, would you ever take a job? Like, I've been offered jobs in major league organizations or minor league organizations. And it's like, it'd be less money, as much work, and having to be back in that pipeline of like, well, the doctor said don't do it, so don't do it. I'm like, it's just not, it'd have to be the right scenario to pull me away from what I'm doing now. But, so I think athletic trainers have the chops for entrepreneurship. Like, if you could work in the trenches as hard as we do in a traditional setting, then you have the ability to do that for yourself. The hardest part is the transition, where you're doing both. You're working on your business and you're working for somebody else and transitioning into that, because you have to have it make you enough money where you can say, all right, if I was just able to put the rest of my time into this, what could it be? And then that's kind of the sticking point for a lot of people is, are they willing to work more hours? But if you're working 8 to 10 hours a day for yourself, you owe it to yourself to put an hour or two in it for you. Like you guys do. You guys don't have to do a podcast. It's extra work. And, you don't necessarily get paid for that work, but the idea is that you put it out there and you provide something of value for everybody else just because you're providing value. And that eventually it'll take off and be something that pays you back.
I think that's what gets a lot of people nervous when they start thinking like, oh, I want to do my own business, I want to start my practice, is that initial cost or that initial time investment. Because like you said, a lot of people don't have the means to just jump ship from where they're at.
Oh, 100%.
And one of the areas that's really tough is just finding a space to be able to do their practice. So how did you go about finding a space and initial equipment to actually start treating patients?
So that's a great question. So at the time I was working at a physical therapy clinic, and this particular clinic was in New York City, and their whole stipulation was, okay, I was basically working as like an assistant, like an aide position, but they had a full gym set up, right? And it was like a very traditional, like old school bodybuilding, like machines for everything kind of gym setup, or like what you would consider like a classic physical therapy situation. But when they hired me, they're like, here's the additional bonus of working for us is you could start your own personal training business. We're not going to tell you what to charge, but they have to be a member of our gym, and you have to pay a $20 fee to the house per session. I was like, okay, fair. So I started to work in the clinic, and then as just doing my thing, helping people with exercise, helping them with modifications of their programs at home or their sports, or, again, this is in a very influential area of New York City, highly affluent. All these people are, big time, like hedge fund, finance. Like, these are people of, you know what I mean? Money's not an issue. That they would have such a good experience with me that they'd say, hey, Mike, my insurance just discharged me. I'm not doing physical therapy anymore, but is there any way that we could continue this? And because I've made so much progress. Awesome. Now I've signed them on as a personal training client. So within 6 months to a year, I had a very solid booking of training clients, and that I was actually doing a little bit of manual work with them, because these are all people coming off injuries, like 10 or 15 minutes of some manual therapy stuff, 45 minutes of training. Here's your program for the rest of the week. And I was doing really well. I was like doubling my income just doing that. So I'd work my 8-hour shift, train for 2 or 3 hours after or before, and I had the makings of my first little side hustle. And then what started to happen was the owners of the clinic saw me doing well, and they didn't like this. No, they didn't like this at all. They are and this is what you'll run into. And I haven't done it yet, but I have a blog post that I'm working on for my website, my new website, that's like reading materials that I thought were really helpful. But for any young entrepreneurial spirited athletic trainers out there, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this book, but it's kind of about power in its infinite and excellent and horrific way that people take advantage of each other or work together. Lots of social implications, political implications. But the first rule of the 48 laws of power, the first law is never outshine the master. It's like if you're in a position where you're subservient to somebody else and you begin to outshine them, they are going to use their influence to crush you. And that's exactly what happened. And that happened to me at multiple levels in my career because I was always that young, passionate, hardworking, like, cross the T's, dot the I guy. And I'd get a lot of attention, but the people who were above me didn't like that, because that outshines them in a way. And so what do? It's not like they work harder. They just put you in your place. Mm-hmm. And so then they started raising my fee. Oh, Mike, listen, it's got to be $30 a session, then at $40 a session, then $50 a session. Then they wanted half. And I basically was just like, F you, because all of these people that I'm working with, they all have their own gym memberships. They all have amazing facilities in their elite high-rise buildings in New York City. So I just started, I have my table still right here. It's my first portable treatment table. It's an Astrolite table. It was a Canadian company. They don't make them anymore. The company's folded, but it's 19 pounds. So it's really light. And I used to jump turnstiles in New York City with it. Like I'd leave the clinic and I would be I'd be like running around New York City with my Graston set and my portable table. And I just went to people's buildings and started doing it that way. And I charged a little bit more. And, after about a year of doing that, I realized, wow, people will pay pretty much anything I ask. Because I started like throwing ridiculous numbers out there just to see if people would say yes. Mm-hmm. So like at first I was charging like, oh, give me $90 a session. And by the end of that year, I was like, hey, it's a $200 a session. And people were like, okay. Like, shit.
Okay.
Well, if I could, I was, again, like even think about that. 2 people a day, $400 a day. I was never coming close to that.
Yeah.
And so that's where, and then I took that money and kind of reinvested it into either more continuing education, more resources, business resources. And then when I made the move out to Long Island, which is where I'm at now, it was with a former classmate who was a strength and conditioning coach. He wanted to start a sports performance gym. I was in the process of negotiating with some CrossFit gyms in New York City to do like a little sports medicine thing. And then we had just decided that, I was less into CrossFit, to be honest. I just saw it as an opportunity. But I've always really been into like traditional field sports, that athletic training setting. And, we teamed up, and at that time I didn't have the resources to invest in a business, but he did. And so I was kind of a sweat equity guy, and that partnership ended up not working out long-term. So that was before the movement underground, but it was the experience that I got during those 3 or 4 years was that I am a dangerous guy in my area as far as sports medicine goes. And people were starting to talk about it. And I started to really grow a following on YouTube and Instagram. And so that made it a little bit easier to take the leap and spend the money that I had to open up my own shop. But it's a process. Again, you start with what you have. You don't need a lot. You need, online, you got to make sure all your legal stuff's in place. An LLC, again, a few $100 to get an LLC done for you. You need a skill set, which again, hopefully you already have that. And you just have to get people to have a good experience with you, and slowly but surely it'll happen.
I think that's the hard part too, is that it is a slow process. You're not going to wake up one day and have a fully flourishing business.
Yeah, no, I recently had hired on a physical therapist who was a new grad physical therapist. He had interned for me a little bit, and good young guy, but very impatient. And he was like, I don't want to work with nobodies. I want to work with pro athletes like you. And I'm like, bro, I've been doing this for 16 years, man. You know what I mean? And like, you're in year 1 and I'm in year 16. So you can't compare where you're at to where I'm at. It's just, it's not fair to you. B, it's not fair to me, and C, it's an apples and oranges comparison. Like, you're just not there yet. I don't give a shit what your credential. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to curse. What your credential is. Like, great, you have a DPT. That doesn't you know the basic entry level stuff. That's what you know, and you're gonna have to build those skills over years. And the other part that bothered me about that statement, and we no longer work together, and this is part of this, is that what's your definition of a nobody? Because that's ridiculous. Like, most of my clients aren't traditional athletes in that sense. They're just physically active people that enjoy an active lifestyle and want more help than they get through the traditional medical model, or they want to be more proactive than reactive. Fair. But like some of them are lawyers that have helped me with my business. I have some that are financial people that do taxes and or investments that have helped me with my business. Like you never know. And this is a message I think for all young athletic trainers is everything you do, everything you say, the way you interact with people, your superiors, the way you interact with your athletes, your parents, your coaches, all of it is not just a reflection on you. It's a reflection of our entire profession. So one of the things that I say to young athletic trainers is take stock of the things that you say and how you say it, because all that bitching and moaning and complaining of that you do to other people is exactly what's wrong with the profession. It's not the NATA and the BOC. It's you. Like, look in the mirror. What have you done to elevate the game? What have you done to elevate the profession? What, take your last minute CEUs on whatever CEU megacorp in the next 4 days, and that's what you're considering professional development, and you bitch and moan when you're getting paid a subpar salary. Well, A, stop saying yes to that subpar salary, and B, hold yourself to a damn higher standard. Sorry if that makes people upset, but like I didn't just like fall into this. Like I was the guy in my 20s because I was so horribly depressed about where I was as an athlete and what had happened with my athletic career that I went home and read research, and I took online courses, and I went and took that money that I had that I made for my private clients and went and did FMS and SFMA and Graston and ART and all these continuing ed courses to invest in myself so that I had the skills to give people a higher level of service that they could get anywhere else. And so you guys kind of hit the nail on the head as people get scared of what they're able to do, but it's you're at that point you're scared of the wrong thing. Not what are you able to do? It's like, what are you doing? That's what you should be afraid of. You should be afraid of not doing enough. And so I think for me, I was motivated to live a life that was better than where I was at. Like I didn't want to live hand to mouth anymore. And I had hit rock bottom, and I never want to go back there again. And that's still the things that drive me even all these years later.
And also, I think being your own boss kind of helps too. That's also kind of nice.
Well, again, it depends on the type of person you are. And I think here's what happens when something goes wrong at the Movement Underground, there's one person that's at fault, and that's me.
Yeah.
And I think I've developed into a mindset, into a person where I can take that and grow from it. Some people, it's hard. It's hard to look in the mirror and and that's why I'm being very demonstrative in the way I say, like, look at yourself in the mirror. What are you doing? Because if you're complaining about your role in the world or in your profession, but that role is defined by you, not by other people, not by the system, right? I came up in the same system that you guys are coming up in. Is it perfect? No. Is it flawed? Absolutely. But that's not an excuse. You could have a DPT and still not make money in the private sector. Like that's probably the case more often than not. You could be a chiro and not make any money. You can be an MD. Well, maybe not an MD, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like if you're going to accept that subservient role and not do anything to better your situation as an athletic trainer, then that's exactly what your career is going to end up being and manifesting. That's just the way it is, and that's the biggest thing that I see, having been in a continuing education role for, a few years now, that a lot of young ATs are just not willing to invest in themselves. They do the bare minimum. Well, how do you get your CEUs? Oh, you go to conference because the school pays for it. Okay, what'd you learn at conference? Oh, how to drink your face off for 4 days in some random city? Like that doesn't make you a better athletic trainer or lead to career development. That's just you taking advantage of a free weekend, which is, again, if that's what you want to do and that makes you happy, by all means, boo-boo, do your thing. But don't complain at that point that you didn't leverage the connections that you could make at NATA or learn something new clinically that could really help your athletes, because those athletes are your customers. And what they do when they graduate and how they talk about you is like, I get referrals from athletes that I worked with years ago that I haven't seen or spoken to in years that send that next up and coming player my way because now they're coaching, or now they're part of an organization, or they have a teammate who's really hurting and getting mismanaged. And all of a sudden now they're another customer. Like every single person we interact with is a potential referral source. And, maybe in a traditional setting, you're not reaping the direct financial benefit of that, but you have to treat your reputation as such.
Absolutely. So outside of that initial investment, that initial, hey, I'm doing this, I'm starting my business, what other challenges have you faced with your practice going forward as it develops?
Well, kind of like where I'm at now. Like I've built a really robust business for myself, and the problem with building it for myself is that I'm having a difficult time scaling that to other people, right? And so for me, I spend a lot of time working in my business and less time working on it than I would like to.
Mm-hmm.
I have another athletic trainer, Brian, that works under me, and phenomenal clinician, fantastic athletic trainer, because he's put the time in and he's been working with me for 2+ years at this point. But it's when people get to choose, they still choose me because, I'm the guy. And, it's Mike Stella ATC that has the big following on Instagram and on YouTube. And so, it's funny, the call I have after this call is with an ad agency, a media agency that's going to hopefully help me figure out ways to expand beyond just myself. And a lot of that is like on the branding and the marketing side. And, again, I have a business background, but we're always the worst at assessing our own stuff. Like, as far as I'm concerned, my operation works really, really well, but you bring in somebody who's a brand manager and they might see a lot of holes in what I'm doing. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, is figuring out which fingers I have to put in to stuff the holes that I've created for myself. But, scaling's definitely an issue. Human resources are an issue. Finding good people that are willing to hustle and put the work in. Like, I think now the issue I run into is like, everybody wants to get paid a lot to do the bare minimum. It's like, sorry, like, I'd rather just do it myself at that point. Like, I don't need you, but you do need people. And so what I'm focused on now is really grooming young, hungry clinicians that have an entrepreneurial spirit. So if any ATs out there looking for some work, I'm hiring in the New York area. Not the easiest place to live, but we do it. So trying to look to expanding the team again.
Do you miss anything from traditional athletic training?
Oh God, yeah, all the time. I miss the travel. I miss being in the trenches and being on the road with my athletes. And when I was at UF, like, we'd get on flights and be like, oh, what, I worked at track and field was my main sport. They'd be like, oh, what event do you do? I'd be like, oh, I'd throw the indoor javelin. Doesn't exist. Because people would think I was an athlete, which is kind of cool. But like, just interacting with the coach again in my little environment, our little ecosystem that we've created here. We have a strength and conditioning facility that we're attached to, a baseball and softball development, indoor cages and tunnels. So we do get a lot of that same team camaraderie that I got in the traditional team settings. But yeah, I would say just like interacting with the athletes on the day to day and kind of like being out on the field and watching games. And that part of it was always really enjoyable for me. I always loved, watching my athletes perform and seeing kind of the work that we were doing translate to the field. That was always super like intrinsically valuable to me, but I still get to do that on some level, which is awesome. Like, even like I have some UFC and professional MMA fighters that I work with that had fights this past weekend, and I'm watching on like UFC Fight Pass. It's just so cool, to see them do their thing and kick some serious ass and just to know that you have and see my logo on their banner. It's just a really cool and validating thing, that they're able to take what we're doing and make it work for them, which is awesome.
So, I should have guessed you worked track when you said you have an Astrolite. Like, that's that's exactly where it's at.
Oh, hells yeah. Dude, these things are vintage now, man. Mine's mint too. It was custom. I went and spent the money. Listen, I'm like, not that I had a lot of money at that time, but like, listen, you get what you pay for. I know what my time is worth and I know what my stuff is worth, and I'm willing to just work with the people who see that. And if you don't see that, that's cool. And I again, and it's like, even like I'll get clients that come in for an assessment. They're like, hey, Mike, I really want to work with you, but I have this prescription to go to PT through my insurance. So I'm just going to go do that. And guess what happens 3 months later? They're right back here being like, I should have just done this 3 months ago, because ice and stim and straight leg raises for 3 months basically did nothing. I'm like, this is my shocked face that it did nothing, So it's like, I understand my price. People are like, oh, your prices are too high. I can get it cheaper somewhere else. I'm like, listen, my prices are what they are. They might be out of your budget, which is again understandable, but that's not on me. That's a you question to answer, not a me question. So it's like, I have clients that pay more, so it's fine.
So I think Mike's gonna vibe well with the action item. He's a man of action.
Oh yeah.
What's an action item?
Mike, what advice do you have for ATs, young ATs, seasoned ATs who are looking into starting their own business? If you could sum it all up.
The only limits that you put on your career are the ones that you put there yourself. That's it. Be patient. It takes time. Like even going back to like the interaction thing, like hold yourself to the highest possible standard. Aim for that. And you will fall short and you're going to fail. And that's fine. You're going to have your moments where you break down that you just can't deal. That's okay. But at least if you're shooting for that target and you miss, you're still better off than having done the bare minimum. I'm just like, I can really empathize because I was the same. I was there. I understand. I get it. I spent, I used to say I spent half my career in the traditional setting, and now that it's been years, that's not the truth anymore, which is kind of messed up. But, I spent more years as an entrepreneur than as a traditional athletic trainer. But I remember working 100-hour weeks. I remember getting paid $6.50 an hour. I remember holidays and nighttime travel that were considered my off days and all of it. But you don't realize the experience that you're sitting on is absolutely freaking gold. You don't realize it. You don't have to go to school to practice under a different license. Like, what other healthcare provider gets this experience? On-field injury, initial assessment before anybody else, physician referral, possible surgery, post-surgical rehabilitation, reconditioning that athlete with strength and conditioning, and then back to on-field competition. I'll wait. Tell me somebody else who does that. And I think people undervalue athletic training. Gets knocked because it's not specific enough, right? That's why the BOC is putting in these specialty certifications, right? They're following suit with the other professions because we're not specific enough. Therefore, it's not valuable. But there are no generalists in orthopedic medicine. There are no generalists. Like, even an orthopedic surgeon, they're not generalists. They're specialists in whatever joint that they do, and that's all they do. Right. So if you got a knee problem, a chronic knee problem, A, I can promise you it's not your knee. And B, if you only look at your knee for an answer, you're only going to get a knee solution to that problem. Right. The system is inherently flawed. And if you can be a savagely good generalist and really help people prioritize where their issues are, strategize their recovery, work on things like dosing, work on things like movement, help them in the short term with things like manual therapy and some modalities, you are absolutely freaking dangerous. You are absolutely freaking dangerous, and people will pay for that. Like, I can't stress this enough. People will pay for that. We think they won't, but they will. People will pay for results. So shoot super high. Hold yourself to a ridiculously high standard. Invest in yourself. For God's sakes, like, invest in yourself. Nobody can ever take that away from you. And then also know where your boundaries are as a person. If you're being taken advantage of at work, it's because you're allowing yourself to be taken advantage of. Put your foot down, draw the line, tell people that this is not what I'm going to do. And this is the reason why, right? I think athletic trainers by nature are very agreeable people, which means they're very easy to manipulate and they're very easy to take advantage of because people will just work and work and work and work on the hope that their merit alone is going to justify their raise. But I promise you, my last Division I job, I documented every single treatment I did, from a Band-Aid to a full-on manual therapy intervention, and what the reasonable and customary cost would be. And I presented that to my athletic director because I wanted to raise from $30,000 to $46,000, which was what I determined was the bare minimum for me to live on my own and pay my bills and my student loans. And they said, well, we'll give you 33. And I said, deuces. And I left. That was the best thing I ever did for myself. And did I leave a lot of athletes and coaches that I loved working with? Yes, I did. But I wasn't going to do it. I was like, I knew what my value was. I had taken a kid from Tommy John surgery to drafted having never thrown a pitch. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up my own ass, but that's the fact. I rehabbed that kid every single day. I went out and threw with him on the field 3 days a week, and he got drafted having never thrown a pitch in a collegiate game. So your skills are there. You just gotta be your own advocate. Be your own advocate first. And by advocating for yourself, you're advocating for all of us.
Absolutely. The impact of an AT.
Can't deny it.
What great motivation to start the new year.
Let's go. 2022 is what you will make of it. What you will make it. You got to shoot. Like, you got to have lofty goals. Set those just like we tell our athletes. Like, don't shoot for just getting back to where you were prior to your injury. Shoot for better than that. This is an opportunity for you, right? And if you're an AT and you're out there and you're unhappy with what you're doing, then change something. Take stock in what you're unhappy about. And if it's financial, go start a side hustle. If you're willing to work, like, ask yourself, like, how much are you willing to work for that extra amount of money that would make you happy? It's never going to make you happy, but you'll start to learn your value. And then you can start to really progress from there. But like I said, I have mentorship on my website. One of the things I'm most passionate about is teaching and sharing this journey with other athletic trainers. You can go to MikeStellaMovement.com. There's a mentorship page. You can literally book time on my schedule with me, and I will, whatever it is, business consulting, clinical mentorship, if I can add value to your career, if you think, a one-on-one time is something that would benefit you and help you strategize, book it up. Let's do it. I'm in. And yeah, you got to pay for it. But again, it's my time is valuable. I'm offering that time up for you guys because I want this for every athletic trainer. Like, what I'm able to do, what I'm doing now, I want this for everybody. This is how we change the game. If there are more high-paying if entrepreneurship becomes a road that more people are willing to walk, it decreases the current supply of ATs in traditional settings, and it increases the demand for our skill set. This is economics 101. That's how you raise the pay grade, not by raising the minimum education, not by making us jump through more CE hoops, by requirement. It's by raising the value of what we do. And if people don't see that value, then they're not worth your time. And they'll either make those mistakes and learn, or, you're going to move on to something bigger and better. So don't invest in yourself. It's so, so valuable. I can't stress that enough.
Absolutely.
This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys a lot.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Okay. Now do you understand where I'm coming from when I said, if you need some motivation?
I think the best word to describe this interview, and also just Mike himself, is he's passionate. He loves what he does, and he really works very hard to provide the best care he can for anyone who comes his way. And it doesn't even have to be, a patient or an athlete. Even his fellow ATs, like we said, like, he does enjoy mentoring young ATs. So he's just a very passionate guy.
Speaking of the new year, if you want to get those CEUs done early, or at least started early, maybe that's your resolution.
I feel like that's a good move. You don't want to be that last minute person.
I know, that's so 2021. We do have free CEUs. 5 episodes will always be eligible. Thank you to Precision AT. The rest can be available for purchase. Make sure you go to the show notes to see which ones are eligible. And then also, if you guys are looking for more of a subscription service, we have a partnership with MedBridge, and they do $175 off if you use our code ATCorner, and also help support the show. So make sure you go check those out. All those things are going to be in the show notes, as well as our link to our Facebook group where you can connect and network with other athletic trainers.
Yes, absolutely.
You got anything else, Randy?
Nope, that was perfect. Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.